Hello, Molly Stevens here, one of the hosts of Everything Cookbooks. Today's episode is the first in a 6-week series where we'll be re-releasing conversations from our backlist that focus on one of the biggest hurdles for many authors, getting the deal. We'll start the series with episode 54, during which Kristin, Kate, Andrea, and I review cookbook ideas from listeners and analyze them for focus, marketability, expertise, and hooks. We had a lot of fun making this episode, and we hope you enjoy it. We'll be back in April with a new lineup of host chats and guest interviews. See you then. Every good cookbook project starts out as an idea, an inspiration. But where do ideas come from, and how do we know when we've got a good one? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and I'm here with Kate Leahy, Kristin Donnelly, and Andrea Nguyen. How's everybody doing today?
Hey, Molly.
Doing well.
Hey, Molly.
It's so nice to have all four of us here.
Yeah.
So back in episode 2, we spoke to Rika Alanik, a literary agent, and she said those memorable 3 words about what every author needs. She said idea, voice, and platform. I remember, Andrea, you're going to have it tattooed somewhere, right?
Undisclosed location, baby.
That's right. But it's such a great way to sum it up. And so today we thought it'd be fun to dive into the murky waters of idea. Where do ideas come from, and how do you know if it's a good one? We've all written our own books, solo books, which means you start with the idea. Talk about how you came up with the ideas, or, I don't know, ones you maybe thought of that you tossed out. Anybody remember?
Oh, for sure. I wrote, probably 10 years ago, I wrote a proposal called Birdseed Baking. I even bought the URL. I still own the URL, and it was all about sort of more plant-forward baking with lots of nuts and seeds and fruit. I don't think the time was right for it. I didn't have a platform focused on this type of baking. So I still own the URL. I still like that recipe list, but, that's just a sort of pushing that one aside for the time being.
Yeah.
I love the name.
I love that. It could be
really
like a
fun.
pet food thing.
I think there was a couple editors who were like, well, we like the recipe list, but the title would definitely have to change. And
Yeah, I love the title, but it's one where I was like, I don't know that it serves you.
Right. Exactly.
Like sometimes like you feel like there is an idea and it's timely, but it's not necessarily for you to write.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had many of those, including a baking book. But I remember the first book where I guess I pitched it to my agent was after I had broken up with a long-term boyfriend. And it was about breakup food and all the sort of phases of grief, and then the process of dating, and then potentially recoupling, and recipes to go with those phases. I had a recipe list and everything. He kept calling it the breakup diet, which I did not like that title. And then I just, of course, then kind of got out of the mood of dwelling on my breakup and never pursued it. So I would never want to
It could be fun.
reveal so many private details, I don't think.
The breakup and rebound diet. Playing the field.
Or just fictionalize it completely and turn it into a rom-com, and then it would with recipes. I think that would be
there we go.
cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you can pay for your daughter's college fund.
I've always wanted to do a breakfast book, but it's too broad, and I keep trying to figure out what the angle. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast, putting stricter parameters on it that would make it work. And I don't know, breakfast is tricky because do people really go to cookbooks for breakfast as much?
Yeah.
Maybe on the weekends they do, but how many really brunch books do you need? So it just kind of, it fizzles out.
Yeah. And sometimes, ideas just come very natural, organically from one book to another,
Mm-hmm.
So after I did my single subjects, I was like, it's time to write the Vietnamese grocery store cookbook. So that was Vietnamese food any day. And then after that, I was working on that book and thinking a lot about vegetables. Eventually, through a series of circumstances, landed at Evergreen Vietnamese. But you think, how can you possibly keep writing about the same particular cuisine? And there's always something there.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And having one book idea build on another is a very valuable thing.
It is. And it's this notion of like, you can make Vietnamese food with accessible ingredients and here are modern ways to do it. And so it's like, if you've got a focus in your niche and you can just really develop that and shape that. So, and that's really like something for people to think about if they plan on having a long-term career in this.
Right. So we're going to dive into idea today, but if you're talking about multiple books, then you're talking about idea, voice, and platform, because it's those three things that connect across a long-term career. To take this conversation further, we did this Instagram poll with our listeners and asked for some of their cookbook ideas. So I think what's going to be really fun today is we're just going to go through some of these ideas that listeners submitted. So some of the things maybe like what qualifies as a good cookbook idea? Do you factor in marketability, sellability, and uniqueness? Is it making a unique contribution? And then, Andrea, you touched on this a little bit with, timeliness of certain books. Like, is there a season for the book, or maybe even, is it so trendy that by the time you get it made, the trend will have come and gone? So those are just things to be thinking about. And it seems like the ideas came into, like, Kristin, you put them almost into categories. They're buckets, like cookbooks of place, they're lifestyle books, they're single subject books. And then baking, I guess, is sort of a category that can go, sometimes it's baking from a place or it's a single subject. But why don't we start with cookbooks of place? Kristin, you want to start us off? What are some of the ideas we've got?
Sure. So we have a few. I'll just go through the whole list. 2 from Olga Kutsaridi, a Ukrainian baking book, or another one called Preserving Ukraine, Recipes from Every Corner of Ukraine. One called Where Ocean Meets Land, a Rhode Island cookbook, a Tibetan cookbook, Memoir from Himalayan Dumplings, a Chilean cookbook that centers around my family's recipe and journey. This came from Erica Vera Williams. From Cookbooking Now, she said another first-generation story, but this time Pakistani American. So pretty diverse list. I feel like they're all viable in their way, but it's like, this to me is like where the author matters so much. That author's expertise, heritage, or time spent in a place.
Right. Do they have a deep knowledge of the place?
Right. And then in terms of marketability and sellability, because, that's what's going to get a publisher interested, is the author's connection to a potential audience to sell the book at a viable number of copies. For example, Ukrainian cooking is very popular. It's a hot topic these days. And so, we know that it takes at least 2 years to put a book together. So we want to think about, you don't want the Ukrainian situation to be going on 2 years from now, but where's Ukraine going to be in the public sphere of knowledge and interest in cuisine, and how can we make a book or 2 books that appeal to that? That's like universal and timeless, right?
Totally. Yeah. I think timeless is a great word for these kinds of books. Even if there is a lot of attention on a place or a certain kind of cuisine, the goal would be to write something that can stand the test of time, be relevant in a decade.
If Olga's debating between these 2 buckets, make a list on which one has the most viable sort of marketability at this moment. I would kind of hedge to the baking side, because baking books, they're not that easy to make. And if you have a really solid baking book, you can have a really long life. I think baking can be sort of an evergreen category if you find a new niche. Not birdseed baking at this moment, but I think Ukrainian baking.
I would say, which one does she know more about?
And maybe one thing to look at is specificity. So even though it might sound specific enough to talk about a Chilean cookbook, because I don't have any Chilean cookbooks in my collection, I'm just thinking for someone like Erica and her idea, really think about the specificity of what about Chilean cooking? What can you deliver that's specific to you, but also will appeal to a broader audience that wants to learn more? And maybe it's not a Chilean cookbook. Maybe it is a book focused on one particular day part, whether that's a certain like main meal, and then it's a book that's dedicated to that. Or you can get specific. And then, like Andrea, with your career, you get specific, you get enough of these specific books, in a row, then you can write the big book that combines all the things you've learned through the years. So nothing wrong with thinking very, very tight, even if it is a book about a place.
Yeah, there is a lack of good books about regional South American food. So
exactly.
Yeah,
for sure.
Most definitely.
I'm not clear about Erica's description here, and I think this needs to be focused. My question is, are we talking about Chilean American cooking or Chilean cooking in another country? So to just sort of really focus in and figure out what that hook is. But I think it's a great start.
I was going to say it's interesting because a lot of the books, they're coming from the perspective of somebody living in diaspora, and it is more personal cookbook. And all cookbooks have the lens of the author. But it was interesting recently speaking with my agent because I was telling him about a book that a woman wanted to write, and she's first generation. And he was like, that sounds interesting. I think I'd be more interested in a book about the place. So if she was an expert or wanted to travel a lot and really get to know the place where she's originally from, to almost take a slightly more academic approach or like a journalistic approach rather than a personal approach. It's interesting. Two different approaches.
Yeah, I think that for a sense of place, you want to always touch upon the original place, the native place, so that there is like this ballast for the information that you're going to produce and share. And so something, the Pakistani American cookbook or the Himalayan cookbook or the Chilean one, if it is coming from a hyphenated perspective, you want to share, it's very funny when I think about this because I am first generation. And when I talk about first generation experiences, I have to tell you, like back in 2006, like people's eyes kind of glazed over because people just think of Vietnam and Asia as being very remote and being exotic. And, now 17 years later, there is now this acknowledgement that, people of color are part of America. But at the same time, when we present information, you want to give a nod to where the ideas were sourced from. You don't have to give a huge nod, because that becomes a different book. That's not a book that perhaps is going to be true to who you are. So, going back to the Rhode Island cookbook, I'm very intrigued by that because it's, it's a small state, as the person points out. I imagine that there are like some community cookbooks out there about Rhode Island, right? And I would love for a book like that to check out what has happened and then what's going on now. It's not like it's, not a viable book, but I think that it's got to get at the subject, at the place, at a very specific angle so that there's like that hook, right?
Well, I do think Where Ocean Meets Land is a great title for a Rhode Island cookbook. I really love that title. I love the sharing the big flavors from my small state. And what I would look at for this book is where the book can be sold. If you can prove to an agent and a publisher that this book can sell really well from gift stores, from places, people going to vacation on the coast in Rhode Island in the summer, how lovely it is. Because I'm just thinking there's a self-published book that I think is about like après-ski, like food to eat after skiing. I believe that woman has made like $1 million selling her book.
Oh my
However,
gosh.
she has sold it specifically at places that have a ski life. So she's hitting up Aspen, she's hitting up Vail, she's hitting up Park City. And so if you can do that with Rhode Island, I mean, you don't have to shoot for $1 million, but you can shoot for a viable cookbook.
Like go to Block Island or something and like all these different boutiques be like, how many do you think you could move a season?
Right. I mean, so you'd have to be really entrepreneurial, but I think it's totally possible. It's just not a book that I don't think most publishing houses are going to have a deep reach in all those little outlets in Rhode Island that could possibly sell this book. But if you're willing to do boots on the ground marketing and can prove that in a proposal, you might have something there.
Yeah, I think that's a really well said. And I do agree. The title's great. And I'd also look at, there are a number of, and I know New England, and I'm sure other regions have done this, but done these sort of taste of place books that have been work for hire. And they're these little books, they're cute and they're charming. And I have friends who've written them and they're great. But to look at those and to see how your book will differentiate itself from those.
Let's go into lifestyle, you guys.
Okay, well, the first one, simple recipes with overlapping ingredients and minimal equipment for Airbnb travelers.
Oh,
So
the
good.
Airbnb experience right there.
Yeah.
Put it in your luggage.
I would love, and I could even see the opening. Like, you have a good idea for a book when somebody like us can immediately see the potential, where I can see the introduction having like a photo of a suitcase that has like the ingredients you want to pack, so you're ready to go, and you have like maybe your ingredient suitcase, things that you have the airplane version, you have the car travel version, so you don't have to go without your flaky salt and your olive oil and your specialty ingredients. I think it's great.
This has been a magazine article. We've seen this in journalism.
True. So is it big enough for a book?
That's my question.
That's the question. And I have a feeling that it may not be, but it may be like a nice small book that you put out there. And you could even put it and make it as an ebook.
I was actually totally thinking ebook angle and like SEO that thing really well. Because you always get those binders at Airbnbs, like, so something that maybe hosts would purchase. I could see it. This is not to discourage somebody. I still could actually see it as like a smaller gifty book. And maybe if you could somehow market to hosts.
Right.
But I think having it electronic, because if you're traveling Airbnb, I'm not putting a cookbook in my suitcase.
Right.
No, I would think it actually would be like hosts would have it there perhaps.
Yeah.
And then, yes, maybe ebook.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I love Airbnbs.
Yeah.
I was thinking about cramming things into my luggage, and sometimes I do. So
Sometimes I do. And then sometimes I really love the experience of just
seeing what you can make out
like
of
camping,
like really cruddy.
Right. The worst pans imaginable that don't that don't lie flat.
And like those little paper, black pepper, things that have no flavor. It's probably like ground up olive pits or something.
So we're intrigued, but I think you'd have to be super creative about doing it.
Or partner with Airbnb, and it would be a co-branded experience.
Yeah.
It actually, the next one, living in an RV and cooking recipes from the road, from Jen Tinney, which had like some similar vibes to me. Van life and RV life on places like TikTok are just huge. And I feel like if you're somebody who lives that lifestyle or really celebrates it and could like sell it on social media, it could do well. Or like Urban Outfitters, it has that vibe to me.
Yeah, the whole Sprinter van life thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I fantasize about getting one of those $200,000 vans.
Absolutely.
Or just 150, I told my husband.
It depends how you outfit it, though.
I know, but I want the luxe stuff.
But I think this one could be really fun. They've added seasonal and local, and I don't know that maybe the recipes will be, but I don't know. That doesn't help me here. I think I want van life cookbook or RV life or something. Recipes from the road, that's great. But the seasonal and local, that could just be messaged through the recipes that, here's how you go to the place, you find out where the markets are, that sort of thing. But my husband and I have a thing when we travel is we look for college towns to stop in because we know we're going to find a co-op and find better produce. It's just, they're little things like that. So those kinds of tips could tip this book towards someone with a seasonal and local bent, someone who's looking for an experience that way.
Yeah.
But I don't think it needs to be in the pitch.
No, I don't think so. It's like fabulous recipes for small, tight spaces with wheels.
What do you think the table of contents would look like? Because I'm trying to think like just how the book would be structured, because that also will be a really important part of its success as a viable idea.
I could see all kinds of cool advanced prep stuff that you could do, whether it's in a package or frozen or in jars or whatever, that then you can whip out and transform into delightful meals. I've seen folks like Heidi Swanson do magnificent things in her Airstream that she and her husband Wayne pull around in California. So it's totally viable.
Well, and Ali Slagle lived in a van and talked about it quite a bit too. So, and I'm assuming Jen has had this experience, or maybe that's what she wants to do is go do this and write the book while she's doing it, So it could also, I could see it with a memoir thing. If it is a really good writer, you could tell, funny stories or poignant stories or about
like a Hunter
life.
S. Thompson kind of thing.
And I don't know, do you park with other vans and then do you have van potlucks? I don't know. I want to know all these things, right? Then do you have to have a chapter on, but I think that's a good question, Kate. What would the table of contents look like?
Okay. The unemployed cook from my tasty handbook is something that is very, very, intriguing to me. Because it's like, what do you do? How do you, it's like a return to like smart cooking, scrappy cooking from like my nearly unemployed days. My husband and I talk a lot about saving money. We look back on those times when we didn't have a lot of money and we're kind of wistful about it, to tell you the truth. Because we did things, like take a look at weekly supermarket circulars and, do all kinds of strange experimental cooking. So I think the unemployed cook is something that could appeal to a lot of folks. But it would have to be price pointed at something that is affordable. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Paperback.
With no 4-color photo types of things, because that's when the prices really go up. So maybe there doesn't need to be photography. Or if it is photography, it's done in a way that still keeps the price point of the book in an affordable category. It also could be a size thing. If the book is smaller, it's going to be more affordable to produce. I would also be really interested to see how this book would be structured. I think you have me on the title. I think a good title can sell an idea. It's sort of like if the title's good, you just figure out the rest because the title is the first thing someone's going to notice with a book. So yeah, I'm intrigued too.
Do you need more though? I don't know. I feel like, does it have to have humor in it? Does it have to have something?
Yeah.
Because my next thing is, so what kind of food are we talking here? Is this for anybody? Is it for an omnivore? Is it a vegetarian unemployed cook? I mean, I immediately kind of like, is this just general cost-cutting cooking? There's a lot of...
It's a series.
It could be a Substack. Maybe the name lends itself more to a Substack.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually a great way to build.
Yeah. And also, offer people an affordable way to get ideas. You don't need to just always do a book nowadays. You can do a Substack. But you're right, Molly, because there have been historically cookbooks and money-saving cookbooks. We don't have them anymore, right? Because saying cheap recipes or cheap food seems déclassé.
Microwave cooking for one, that's a classic.
But I think it could come back. I think there could be a market for it, but I think building it as a Substack or something and building a platform.
There's a book that did very well called Good and Cheap, Eat Well on $4 a Day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a self-published book, perhaps. Then Workman published it. It was a New York Times bestseller. So cookbooks focused on budget can do well.
And actually, Kristin, that's a really good point, because one thing we haven't mentioned today yet is comparable titles. And this is a great place if you're not sure if your book is viable. Go look for books that are similar enough to yours and see. You can look on Amazon and see how many reviews they had. You can see if they got traction, because if there was a sign of success in this topic, but it's been a few years, it might be time for a refresh.
Totally.
Exactly. Okay, what about this cookbook idea where it's filled with different authors and chefs' favorite nostalgic meals?
Ooh, tough one.
Yeah. There have been articles about this.
I was going to say, this seemed like it screamed magazine story to me, but these anthology kinds of books are often hard to sell.
Yeah, because they kind of aggregate ideas and stories. And so, when you package them together, what's the selling point? What's going to trigger someone to drop, say, $30 on this book?
And meal books are tricky too, because then, so say the meal is a salad and then a pasta and then I'm being very classic here, but then a dessert of some sort. Are all 3 recipes associated with that meal? I mean, how is it? Meals are tricky, that's all.
Just think of the pantry section for a book like this. You wouldn't necessarily have one, or if you did, it would be very fragmented, because if you're pulling from chefs from all different types of food, all different parts of the world, it's going to be really hard to have a cohesive sort of pantry to cook from. And then it makes the book sort of hard, because you have to over-explain things in every single section to make sure people get the right ingredients and all that.
And whose voice is it in?
So then, to make this viable, maybe you focus on a particular meal, or even snacks, or, something where it's kind of fun, and you got to package it. Cause I feel we look at this, we're it's so hard, but how can we make this potentially work?
Chef snacks around the world. I like that.
Yeah. Snacks. Late night snacks, after work snacks, that kind of thing.
I don't cook snacks, but maybe that's me.
I live for snacks.
I buy snacks.
I love making snacks. I'm not a snack buyer. I'm not a chippy person, but I love putting together snacks. I love calling my appetizer chapters in my book snacks. So I'm snacky. This next one, a regular length book with each chapter on a specific season and ingredient or produce. That's a little too vague for me, and I would have loved a little bit more meat so that we could sink our teeth into it.
I feel like a book that is that general anymore, it needs an author who either has this huge platform or has an incredible writing voice, like somebody who's just going to bring those kinds of recipes to life with their prose. Otherwise, it sounds a little vague.
It's a fine organization for a book, but it feels like a organization for a generic book. And
Right. Vishwesh Bhatt, his book is organized by ingredient, but it's not the reason he's writing the book. So you can use that structure for a book that has a very specific narrative, and it can work, but it can't just be the reason you're writing the book. And you can go back and listen to that interview to learn more about it. But that's one example where you can use that as a structure, but it's not the main focus of the book.
Correct. And Visha's book, he has, like I made his green tomato pie, which is absolutely delicious. But, you don't find it in a dessert chapter. You really do have to read through the entire book and get his story and his sense of place. There's got to be an interesting voice and hook there.
Yeah.
single subject, my favorite.
Oh, you know me. I love single subject deep
Love me a
dives.
good single subject book. So we got a bunch here. I love that the first one came from Paula Forbes.
Yeah, friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod.
Of Stain Page News. And she suggests The Yeast Cookbook. And she's wanted to see this book, and she's mentioned it before.
She doesn't want to write it, to be clear. She wants somebody else to write it.
Okay, so what would appeal to the four of us? What would we want to see? That's all about us.
Yeah, I guess I was assuming a yeast, like a fermentation type of book.
But specifically on different types of yeast, natural yeast, instant versus fresh.
Would there be like a wine and beer chapter too for like different?
Yeah, see, I feel like this is a hard one to harness because, yeast it's like spores all are amongst us. We are spores.
Right.
Right? I'm probably fermenting right now as I'm talking to you.
Paula, we need more information, or we need to know exactly what you're so passionate about, why you want to see this book exist, because I'm having a hard time just visualizing. Yeah.
I bet she sees like a cool cover design.
Oh.
I could see it, though, explaining all the different kinds and limiting it to like baking yeast. That's where I went immediately.
Active dry versus rapid rise, that kind of.
Yeah. And creating your own like sourdoughs, but then like enhancing sourdough with a little bit of store-bought and just sort of a real deep dive on how they work. It wouldn't have to be a huge book.
I dug it up. She wants a book on the science of yeast with recipes that maximize that flavor.
Got it. Yeah. So a real heavy lifting science book. You're writing it with maybe more text than recipes and more. Yeah. I think that could be interesting, sort of homing in. People get really crazy about yeast. I found this out when lavash came out and people were after us and why we didn't use a natural ferment for our lavash dough. And it's because we didn't see them using that in Armenia. And then people were saying, but no, they do that in Armenia. I said, some might do it, but we didn't see it that way. And people were adamant that it would be unhealthy to use an instant yeast. And I just would like a nice hardworking science book that says, okay, yeast is yeast. Here's like the fundamentals. Do your natural sourdough. There's great reasons to do it, but there's also, sometimes you need a little instant yeast for certain types of procedures. So, yeah.
No, and I think it's this, I know from my own personal research, the science is out there in other books, but sometimes it's hard to find and it's put in with other information. And so, okay, science-minded writers, this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, the salad dressing cookbook, y'all.
So there are a lot of them already. I mean, a lot. It's been written. That doesn't mean it couldn't be written again, but talking about comp titles, I would start there. I mean, you just do a quick search and you'll come up with quite a few. And then I would also look at sauce books because there's quite a few sauce books that have a big salad dressing chapter. That's, I think, where you'd have to start.
There's even an association of dressings and sauces, or sauces and dressings, an official association. Maybe they don't have a vinaigrette book, but I think salad dressing is a tough one. So I think it's tough because it would really depend on your platform. If you're building a platform on salads, you are the salad person. Salad for President, that wasn't about salad dressing, but you have to have like this persona that's bringing people into a book. Otherwise, it's a really great article. You have 10 different salad dressings. Probably most people don't really need more than that.
Yeah. A former coworker of mine, Grace Parisi, wrote this great book called Get Saucy.
Yeah, I was just looking at that book.
Yeah. That was like salad dressings and far beyond, all kinds of sauces. Really great book.
I mean, it could be a small gifty book, but again, small, like you said, how many salad
Yeah, I
dressings?
would start out with an article and test the waters, or like do a Substack kind of thing, or do something like that so that you can really build momentum and see how interested people are. For all you know, you may like get all your information out there and get satisfaction that way.
Mhm.
Not every idea needs to become a book.
Yep.
And you may find out that you got your mojo, you got your anxiety and your creativity out there to the world, and you can still keep it going. But you don't necessarily need to have the pain of making a cookbook.
Right. Yeah, I could see a really good article about the different types of, sort of a chart with the different types and the ratios.
Yeah.
I mean, the ratio would be really interesting, but I'm not sure a whole book. Okay, another salad one, big salads for dinner. This is from someone who calls themselves Cookbooking Now.
There are many books like this. I do think it's one of those books that you could probably rinse and repeat every few years. Like publishers are probably always looking for their version of it. There's potential, but it's also quite saturated.
Yeah. I mean, this, sweet greens kind of thing. Maybe like they would want to do a branded book on big salads kind of thing.
Bring in, it was a Seinfeld episode.
I was just going to say, so the big salad, I feel like that cultural reference doesn't quite work anymore.
The 90s are back, Molly. The 90s are here.
Okay, maybe it does. Maybe it does. All right. But I would definitely do comps on this one. I would start with comps because as Kristin said, there are quite a few salad for dinner books, but an idea that seems to sell.
All right. How to freeze what to freeze. Will it freeze? Bibi, who is Champagne and Cookies, and she's a experienced pastry chef. She also runs a fabulous cookbook club in San Francisco. I love my freezer gold.
Yeah.
It's a great article for sure. And then I feel like there are some interesting angles, because there's the kind of like freezer meal thing, that busy parent type of cooking that people like. I also feel like there could be something interesting with people who love their like bigger chest freezers, and knowing that she's a baker, maybe that's what she had in mind too, was like baking and freezing things and how to defrost it.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to know like if there are like rubrics for what will freeze and what will not, because I'm always throwing things in the freezer to see how well it will do. My mother is a fearless freezer person.
Fearless freezer, that's the title.
See, there you
Fearless
go.
freezing.
But again, I want a little more. I want to know what this is about. Is it going to have a dense section up front that's going to talk about what freezes well, it says how to freeze, what to freeze. But we're talking cookbooks, so I'm assuming they're recipes. And are those going to be, are they make-ahead meals? Are they pastries? I kind of want to know, because otherwise it's too vast. Or maybe they're chapters. Maybe there's a chapter on make-ahead meals. There's a chapter on soups. There's a chapter on, I don't know. How big is this book?
It could be really nice to have that front matter that really explains things that freeze beautifully, things that are more challenging, and how to work around those, and then things that don't even bother. And then from there you have, I'm thinking it's not quite like the unemployed cook, but I would feel like the recipes that would fit well into this book would be simple weekday dinners, things that maybe there's a make-ahead component, and this is how to freeze it, and this is how to reheat it. Batch cooking, those kinds of things would fit into a book like this.
Is there a chapter on all those little ice cube trays that
God.
pesto and ramp and all
tamarind.
that?
That's my thing.
Yeah, tamarind. It could be a whole chapter and how to keep your ice cube trays from tasting like that for the rest of their lives. You need separate ice cube trays, like you need a separate spice grinder, so the one that you make your pesto in doesn't.
Molly, you're speaking from experience, my friend.
Well, I don't like my cocktails to taste like pesto.
It's so green.
But that could be a great chapter on, little flavor boosters from the freezer.
Yeah.
Freezer gold, like Andrea said.
Freezer
that could be
gold,
a chapter.
man. Yeah, that's my life. How about Pasta for One from Cookbooking Now?
I kind of like it. But again, I don't know. Is it a whole book?
Yeah. Did Judith Jones' book, wasn't that Cooking for One?
Yes.
It was a quiet book, but a very practical book. I wonder how well it did during the pandemic, actually.
I wonder if this is an article more than because there are a number of Cooking for One books out there. This is a very narrow focus. Once you get a couple recipes, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do pasta books do in general?
But if you wrapped a lifestyle thing into that single subject, I think you could sell it,
Kind of like a back pocket pasta.
Yeah. Maybe a whole chapter on top ramen. Just open up the package and do all different things with it.
The promise of like a simple meal that you can make for yourself has appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Cooking with Heston, the high-end cookware produced by a company called Meyer that does Calphalon too. That's sounding like a branded book to me.
Yeah, it's interesting with these branded cookware books because I was looking into this recently and it seems like there are some that transcend to like having this wider distribution. Like if the cookware is, people romanticize it like Lodge cast iron or Le Creuset or even Staub. With actual like pots and pans, I don't know. Like sometimes I think maybe there's a little less romance, so it becomes more in that like branded cookbook, maybe less wide distribution.
And they're associated with a couple of high-end chefs. Like I think there's a Thomas Keller imprint on it, and then another name I can't remember right now.
It's beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Yeah, unless this were branded, I mean, would you do a book on your own without linking to the brand?
Right. It would have to come from the brand. And then, the cookware itself is relatively pricey. It's Lux stainless steel.
Yeah, yeah.
And is there something that's specific about that? I would come up with like 3 points. What is unique about Heston and like how many people are using it and what's the future, and is it also, can it teach something that is generalizable, applicable to other similar kinds of high-end, heavy stainless steel cookware? And then how do you clean it? I don't know. It's an interesting topic, but it's a branded.
I mean, if you did this, you'd want to make sure Heston was selling it alongside their product because otherwise...
Oh, yeah.
As an author, I think the only way you do this is it's a work for hire, and it's the brands and the publisher. Maybe a publisher has a deal with the brand. So it could be the publisher has a contract with the brand that stipulates they will publish the book, and you would either get hired by the brand or the publisher to just execute and write it. And that would be it. You'd get a flat fee. I don't think this is something that you would have an agent negotiating royalties on. Maybe your agent just negotiates the flat fee because this isn't something you could control. This isn't something you would be promoting. This is really a vehicle for their own promotion.
And get them to send you all their cookware.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That
you would benefit from a lot of cookware.
Yes.
Yeah, it would be a fun project. Huh?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next one is a kid's cookbook and a coloring book from the Plated Pantry. I think this is her dream book, and she is actually self-publishing a pantry basics book. I do think that this has a lot of potential. Kids' cookbooks. I think America's Test Kitchen put one out this year, and it is selling like hotcakes. Kids' cookbooks, I think, are having a moment. And coloring books, I was just hanging out with my niece and nephew. They can't get enough coloring books. So how it comes together, that's the tricky part, because coloring books aren't really made to last. So how does that come together? I'd be curious to know what the author has in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting production. But I feel like there's like kid cookbooks that it's like the same kinds of recipes, like very assembly oriented over and over and over. And then there's kids cookbooks that are almost like too ambitious. So like finding this sweet spot of clever, but not necessarily like MasterChef kids.
Right. No, I think about like how my mother trained me to cook. Started out simple, there was a lot of discipline, and then she gradually like got me to do more things. She kind of snuck it in, and I don't know if she had a grand plan or not, or she just needed help in the kitchen. But it worked out, and I think that's something like that's kind of more organic instead of, like you said, master top chef ambitions, where the teenagers are running around the kitchen trying to get all the ingredients, which I've had done in my cooking classes, which is like really great. I was like, calm down, we're just cooking here, young people. But like Priya Krishna has a kids cookbook coming out soon. So, and yes, America's Test Kitchen, one time I was in their studios and they have this whole amazing production team that backs up their division there. Could it be a coloring book where, like you could like color in it and then wipe it off kind of thing? I don't know. So that it has longevity, I guess, has to get coated then.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting idea.
I don't know. And this may be something we could do in a future episode, but I don't know enough about kids' cookbooks to know like age ranges for them, because I'm sure they're aimed at different age ranges because, a really young kid is going to be different than a tween and that sort of thing. So I think that would be something. I mean, I love the idea. I think it just sounds really fun.
Maybe it's packaged as 2 books. It's the cookbook and it comes with a coloring book. And I could actually see that being a really great gift item because it's like a 2-for-1.
Could be fun as like a little little tear out booklet in the center.
Or like maybe there's stickers.
Yeah, like an ingredient coloring book kind of thing.
Ooh.
Oh, that
yeah.
could be fun.
Or vegetable coloring book. I would have loved that when I was growing up.
Could be a whole series, a kid's cookbook, and it could be ingredients. It could be breakfast. There's my breakfast book. That's what I'm going to do.
I want to do one. All right. Baking, y'all, like a subject that can just not have enough or genre in and of its own, but we just can't get enough of them.
It's true.
The Pale Blue Tart about regenerative baking, recipes and tips for climate era baking. Carolyn Saunders is interested in producing something like this, and she's even got a Substack on this subject. I'm unclear about regenerative baking, so I don't know what that is.
Maybe we need Paula's yeast book to help explain some of this. I'm just thinking things that are growing, like, I don't know, like I want to know a little bit more about what's being.
It's probably talking about the agriculture.
Absolutely.
The grains, because a lot of times with grains, there's a lot of like monocropping, which is not necessarily a great way to farm. So maybe it's talking about that and sourcing certain grains with a mind towards sustainability. And then I wonder if it's even like the actual baking. Like,
yeah, I'm wondering if it's like using
lower heat or different types of heat sources.
All electric and no gas. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I think it's an interesting topic. I think it all depends on the success of the Substack. I mean, it's really smart. Pale Blue Tart sounds like that's the name of the Substack, and I would see where that goes. If it grows as a Substack, then no reason it couldn't grow into a book.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm curious, Pale Blue Tart, what it means. Too.
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
That doesn't mean anything to me, but maybe it will become apparent.
Yeah, agreed.
Maybe this is the first of climate era baking and cooking book ideas. Maybe this is breaking new ground. So that's why it's kind of exciting. I'd like to follow along.
Absolutely. Sweeteners that are environmentally consciously produced as opposed to, cane sugar and things like that. So pretty interesting.
All right. Fruit and spice dessert books, the Jam Lab. She is South Asian, great flavors and ideas that combine, her experiences in California. I'd want to have that fleshed out a little bit more. Is there specific fruits or spices? Are they, seasonal to California? A little bit more information.
Yeah. But in general, fruit dessert books are great. They do well. They have endless appeal. And I think the addition of spice in here differentiates it a little bit. But again, I'd want to know more.
It sounds appealing.
Right. And it can be focused. It doesn't have to be every fruit, maybe some parameters on it. It doesn't have to be seasonally focused. It can be, I would like to know, again, with this structure, is it divided by fruit or is it divided by type of baked good or condiment or whatnot? So I love the handle, the Jam Lab. It's just a great name. So I'd like to know what the hooky title would be.
I would love to see a dessert book that gets away from, cinnamon on apples and pumpkin pie spice in ginger. There's so much more you could do, and it's really fun to play with those things. And so really go deep into, using spices that are normally associated with savory cooking and bringing them into baking. I mean, I think that could really be something, and spices are having a real moment right now with all these great new spice companies, and maybe the spice blends come in. I don't know. I could see a lot happening here.
Julie Sani years ago had this really great, totally out of the box spice book, so little book, and it was so good. And I remember her sharing it with me when I interviewed her for a story, and I could see this book being something like that, where it's just like some usual suspects, but then a lot of exciting combinations and ideas.
There was a great book, The New Sugar and Spice by Samantha Senavaratne.
Oh, yes. That's a fabulous book.
Yeah, that used a lot of spice, but it wasn't necessarily fruit desserts. It was all kinds of desserts, but it was creative uses of spices. Yeah. I really love that book.
Yeah, and I think specifying fruit takes this one level further.
And honestly, for 2 years out, that book will be 10 years old. It's just, But I will say with any of these kinds of ideas, I often find once I start to sit down to write a proposal, it's like then you start to know. Sometimes you want the validation before you start writing a proposal, but I do find you gain more clarity by actually like doing the work of the proposal. And then you can see like, how passionate do I actually feel about this? And is there 100 recipes that I could get out of this idea? And what am I trying to say? What is this idea?
Yeah. Or is it just, go back and listen to episode 1. Should you write a cookbook? No, but there's some really good questions you have to ask yourself there. How much time you want to spend with this, how passionate. But that's a great recommendation, Kristin, to write the proposal. This was great. Thank you to all the listeners who sent in ideas. It was really, originally when we talked about this episode, we were just going to come up with our own ideas. And this is so much more interesting, hearing all these different things.
And I thought we'd get like 3.
Yeah. Hey, this Everything Cookbooks has traction. People are talking about it.
Thank you guys. That was really fun. fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. Send us your questions or comments through our website at everythingcookbooks.com. You can find more episodes on our website or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. And thank you as always to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.